presenter is going to be Jason Finucan, who is the founding principal of Empower Professional Services, which partners with organizations so they may improve their ability to manage the negative impacts of mental illness, ultimately reducing stigma and minimizing lost productivity. Jason has been a volunteer advocate for mental health awareness with multiple organizations since 2006. He'll be speaking tonight on the topic of stigma as it relates to mental illness. Jason Finucan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Etienne. So I should qualify, because don't worry, nobody ever gets it right. It's actually Jason Finucan. It's a name that if you see it in print is never pronounced correctly by anybody other than my family members. So as Etienne said, tonight I'd like to speak to you about stigma and why stigma is a 4-letter word. I can see some of you counting. Let me save you the trouble. There are 6 letters in stigma, but as a metaphor, it works. Stigma is a 4-letter word, and I came to this realization a very long time ago, or over a very many number of years, and let me share with you. The story started in 1984 when I was only 9 years old. I was sitting cross-legged watching Three's Company after school, as I did almost every day, but this day was different. All of a sudden, my heart jumped from a resting rate to over 200 beats per minute, and the effect was dramatic. It felt like my heart was trying to leap out of my chest. That day was the first day of a 4-year journey of discovery, diagnosis, surgery, and then recovery. As it turned out, I had a rare nerve defect in my heart. Now there was good news. It could be fixed. The bad news was that it took open heart surgery to fix it. Now, although the surgery was terrifying, I will fully admit that, I do consider myself very lucky because I came out the other end with a repaired heart and, after a long recovery, full health. However, what I realized in going through this was that, and as I look back to this day, I'm overwhelmed by the love and support that I was given by my friends, my family, by everybody in my entire life as I went through that difficult time. Not once did anyone treat me like I had done anything wrong. Not once did my teachers question my work ethic or my motivation when they found out I had to miss 2 months of school as a result of the surgery. And not once did any of my friends seem uncomfortable with my illness. I had no idea how lucky I was. Let's fast forward 15 years to 2003. My surgically repaired heart, thank goodness, was working great. And I had the kind of health that we all so easily take for granted. And then things changed rather dramatically when I first experienced clinical depression. Now at the time, I had no idea that it was clinical depression. What I thought was that I had a virus that just wouldn't go away. But in reality, it seemed that after many years after the first major organ had failed and was fixed, now another one, this time my brain, wasn't working properly. And despite the similarities between the two illnesses, let's think about it. Both major organs, both biologically failing to work right, and both causing dramatic symptoms. But the result was totally different experiences. That 4-letter word I referenced, stigma, it first showed up in the form of self-stigma. You see, I was part of the problem. As it turned out, I had been quietly judging those in my life who suffered from depression as having a lack of motivation, as having a lack of discipline. They had character flaws that I couldn't understand and certainly didn't relate to. This is the way that we all have grown up. This is the way that we all have seen and reacted to mental illness, particularly at my age or older. But unfortunately, when you go through both a mental illness and a physical illness, you're quickly made aware of how differently that you're treated. So, in comparing these two, I learned that essentially, I had to reinvent myself. I had to find a way to navigate through this world as somebody who had a mental illness, and it took me a long time. That self-stigma was so strong that I actually resisted treatment for 2 years, and I tried to will myself back to health as though that was somehow an option. However, Ultimately, I was forced to face the reality that I had to treat this illness, the second illness I was facing, exactly as I had treated the first illness. That there essentially was no difference. And that if I treated it like a medical illness, something that needed my attention, my research, needed treatment ultimately, that I would be able to get well. And I did. Following that approach, after 6 months, I was able to regain full health. And since June 2005, almost exactly 10 years ago, most of the days I have lived well, free of the symptoms of what I had. Now, I mentioned depression. It wasn't just depression that I was fighting with. Where it became difficult for me was that I was also experiencing the other side of an illness called bipolar disorder. So I would have depression, but then I would have these sudden, sharp relapses that would make me feel absolutely fantastic, especially compared to the depression. But then they would last for a little too long, and I would feel a little too fantastic. And the result there was, the clinical term I should say, was hypomania. After going through cycles of hypomania and depression, and ultimately a manic episode, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, the way stigma showed itself after bipolar disorder from other people, not just from myself, was very strong. It absolutely was in my professional life, but also in my social life and in my family as well. What I came to realize was, first I had to own my illness, I had to get better, and then once I got better, I recognized that I had the ability to help others by sharing my story. And what I also learned was stigma can only be erased if we educate, because it only exists because of a lack of fear. It only exists because of a lack of understanding, which creates fear. So I'm going to leave you with an example about how we can shift our attitudes that worked for me. My older brother struggled to understand that bipolar disorder was an illness and not an issue that was rooted in my emotional self. In addition to the issue tag, he also used very common lines that other people use, like, try harder, or do you really need that medication? And one day he was suffering, poor guy, from kidney stones. And he was complaining to me that he had to go to the doctors hours away to have them zapped so that he could have them passed. And I said to him, I decided to take this opportunity. Do you really need this treatment? Let's think about it. Could you just try harder and zap those kidney stones yourself? Do you really need even a doctor to help you with this issue? And after a long pause, he said to me, I get it. And he never again spoke of my illness in any other terms than what it was and what it is, an illness. Now, to finish, I simply will say, stigma is a 4-letter word. Let's get rid of it together. I think if any of you know anyone who suffers from mental illness, and the statistics say that you probably do, we can together view that word as something that is inappropriate, offensive, and simply that doesn't belong. Thank you.